So my name's Alexandra. I founded humhum about 3 years ago to really create a space and a community where we could examine this topic of dating and do it in a way that gives us energy, feels nourishing, takes out some of the yuck factor, and really makes it about self-discovery and focusing on the things we can control versus the things that we can't. And so today we're going to explore this topic of individuation, and this presentation I worked on with Dr. Eileen Shoals, who's kind of our main in-house mental health practitioner. She isn't able to join us today. She had some things she had to tend to. However, I was able to capture our conversation and planning for this. And so we'll have snippets of her and me, her video and me talking throughout this presentation. And then, like I mentioned earlier, for those of you that want to stay on for the discussion group to dive deeper together, please do. So today we're going to explore individuation and why it's relevant in the context of dating or in, when you're forming a new connection. And I often hear from our community that people feel really impacted or challenged by other people's opinions or perspective, or even just the way that the collective holds this notion of dating. It just doesn't resonate with them, with us, with me. And so we're going to be examining, like, how do we individuate and really lean into what resonates for us. So today, let's see, there we go. Today we'll be covering what individuation is, its role in dating, what differentiation is, the tension and the dissonance that might arise in the process of individuating, and then how we can examine what's true for us versus what we were taught, what was inherited, some practices to help us stay in integrity with ourselves because of some of the difficulty of the tension and the dissonance that can arise. And then we'll talk a little bit about power struggles in newish relationships. So how you hold how you date, or how you are holding how you date and who you're dating and when you're dating is definitely a part of how individuated you are in this area of your life. And the goal today is to look at this from a place of inquiry and without judgment. So you'll hear me say this a lot, is like, can we notice without judgment what's arising in our experience and which of our ways of being, beliefs, narratives are showing up in our experience of dating, and we can start to identify which of those narratives or ways of thinking might be causing us suffering and which of those actually leads to more internal freedom and expansion for us. And so that's a lens I often like to look through is this, am I contracting? Am I feeling smaller? Am I shrinking when I'm listening to this internal narrative, or is something opening in me? Am I expanding? And so that's something you can kind of look at in your own experience as we go. So I'm going to play a clip of Eileen, and she's going to talk a little bit about the definition, the history, and the relevance of individuating. So I'll go ahead and do that.
Give you.
Okay, tell me now.
Is your ability to individuate from any system or any program or group. But I want to give you some definitions from the dictionary so that you can kind of put it together for yourself. It's the act or process of individuating, such as the development of the individual from the universal. So there's this process, there's this growth cycle that occurs where you begin to develop and recognizing that you are not the whole, you're part of the whole, but you also have your own individual parts. Individuation was definitely introduced to us by Carl Jung, analytical psychologist, and he stated that it's the process by which the self is formed by integrating elements of the conscious and unconscious mind. And the reason this is interesting is because when we're dating, how often are our actions and our attitudes and the nuances, in the dynamic, subconscious or unconscious, right? It's also the determination of the individual in the general. And I love this idea of within the general experience, it could be work, it could be family, it could be dating, whatever's going on, your determination to emerge, to rise above, to find your resilience, to allow yourself to be an individual instead of connected to group think. So the determination, just the will to recognize that ability is considered individuation. Differentiation is distinguishing your characteristics from others. It's giving yourself permission to be different, to have your own unique hue, your own unique color, your own unique flavor, even in a situation like a work situation, family, love, partnership. So it's a permission slip to be different from your family of origin or those norms that may not resonate with your particular situation. And think about how much courage is required to allow ourselves to differentiate from a system that's maybe all we know culturally. It could be religious, whatever it is, subculture. Oftentimes we do what we do because it's been modeled, we learned that, and then we think, well, this is the way that it goes. Now that we're talking about individuation and differentiation, I'd love to talk for a moment about SEMO, which stands for Subconscious Emotional Memory Override. Now, when we talk about this, we're actually talking about negative subconscious memory overrides from between 0 and 6. We all experience subtle, I'll say traumas. They're not necessarily big traumas. They could be that you dropped your ice cream cone, or they could be that somebody didn't want to play with you in the sandbox. The child will have a reaction. The kid might cry, the kid might get angry, who knows what the kid does. But the way caregivers respond to that child's reaction sort of sets the stage for how we're going to move through life later. It's going to affect, quote unquote, attachment styles, communication styles, an ability to individuate and an ability to differentiate. Give themselves permission to differentiate or stay maybe codependent or enmeshed. I'm going to give myself permission to change those dynamics, even though there's epigenetics at play, even though there's family modeling, even though my mom always yelled at my dad, even though my dad was always silent and wasn't emotionally expressive, even though that did a train wreck on my nervous system, but that was what I was used to. I was entrained to tolerate that. That's why I see these patterns in my relationship. I'm going to differentiate from all that and give myself permission to find my truth. I'm going to allow myself to show up in partnerships in ways that feel congruent and aligned and actually help me feel anchored and grounded in the relationship as opposed to dysregulated and disjointed and what the heck's going on. As we begin to individuate, it's extremely healthy because it actually indicates that there's some resilience happening. There's some inner determination happening. There's some separation from the whole, which is all healthy. And there's this ability it's happening at a subconscious level, but the unconscious parts of you are connecting and integrating and amalgamating with the conscious parts of you, which is really wonderful. If you think about being in a relationship, to be fully present, we need to be online consciously and subconsciously, right? Individuation is your ability to.
Okay. So as you might have started to think about, the process isn't necessarily a comfortable one. And as we embark on individuating and getting clear on our own values and how we're holding, whether it's dating or relationship or anything, a lot of courage is required. And we do build resilience in the face of this tension between our innate desire to want to belong and, have healthy attachment bonds. And then this need to individuate, this need to kind of come into our own truth and our beliefs so that we can show up authentically. And so, as Eileen mentioned, cognitive dissonance will arise when there are parts of ourselves that aren't integrated. And so in recognizing what isn't sitting right with us, something that's not feeling aligned, it's an amazing place to actually start looking at what isn't working for me. And so we can actually start to see this dissonance or this internal tension as a doorway, as an opportunity to get clear on what is not aligning. And we can bring curiosity into that process so that eventually we can come into more alignment with ourselves. But that initial friction or that dissonance or this like, ugh, I don't like this, like this is really uncomfortable, that's actually our gateway to bring more curiosity into our experience. And so one way we can also think about this is getting clear on what it is that we value when it comes to dating. So obviously everyone has opinions and experiences. And so it's like, thank you. And, sometimes it's important to tune out the noise, and sometimes it's important to, collect data, collect information just to see how you respond to it, not necessarily to see other people's perspectives as truth, but more so like, oh, what's this evoking in me? How does this land with me? And being able to discern when you're in a place of like needing to gather, information and see how you're responding to things versus when you need to kind of go inward and just see what values are emerging for me. What am I going for? What do I want to experience? So in her book, All About Love, let me go to the next page. Bell Hooks shares about her journey individuating, which really led her to define love for herself, which it's an incredible book. For those of you that haven't read it, I might do a book club at some point on this. But her definition was inspired by the psychiatrist M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. And she defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. So whether or not you resonate with that definition, what I think is so powerful about what even just having a definition does is it allowed Bell Hooks to be able to say that love is not actually a feeling, something that's out of her control. Rather, it's a choice, it's an action, a practice. And so as you're thinking about dating or, your practice in relationship, what is it to you? What makes you feel more empowered, more in control versus what gives your power away and puts this outside of yourself into some kind of something that's a little bit more fleeting. So yeah, I see people are like, do a book club. Yes, Susanna, I would like to. So I might actually lean into the community to see if anyone wants to help me co-lead that. Yay. So I'm going to go into Eileen's next section, and she's going to talk a little bit about the dissonance that can arise when we're in this process of individuating. Okay, tell me if you can hear the sound this time. Oh, wait, okay. Here we go.
So we all have some sense of loyalty to family of origin or early caregivers. We have some loyalty, it may be displaced loyalty to the way that we were raised. So if we were raised in a, let's say, very dysfunctional, chaotic setting, although our nervous system may desperately want a different experience in romantic partnerships, mentally and to some degree, even physiologically, there's so many ways we've been entrained to accept the BS, or the dysfunction, and that is normal for us. But learning to individuate and differentiate from these societal norms or familial patterns or things that we were taught that just are outdated, antiquated, or even if they still work for a great number of people, they don't resonate for us individually. It takes so much courage to break away from what looks good over there, looks okay on paper, doesn't work for me at all. To be able to stand your ground, to break away from that, there's going to be tension. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to be unsettling, as cognitive dissonance is so prevalent when we are dating. I like the idea of us giving ourselves permission to gauge, but when we're doing that, there can be incredible tension. Is this relationship significant to me? Is it serious? Is it good? Is it healthy? Is it, something that is worth me pursuing? There can be incredible discomfort, because a lot of the time, as we are looking at the subtle nuances or the dynamics that don't work, we're being confronted with all the things we experienced consciously and subconsciously in our family of origin, in our even our friendship circle. There can be this tension as we are allowing ourselves to set boundaries and create what works for us, oftentimes because what was modeled for us looks very different from what we're embarking on now. As we are going through any kind of relationship, whatever stage we find ourselves, in, the nervous system is also experiencing whatever is happening. So the psyche is having its experience, the heart space, the body's having a physiological, experience, the nervous system. And so whatever our reaction is, or whatever our response is to the relationship dynamic, it could be a combination of things. Sometimes we might feel conflicted, and sometimes our families' way of moving through the world, or our friends' way of moving through the world, has infiltrated our head and heart space and impacting the dynamic. So just taking a step back and breathing and giving ourselves permission to realize whatever's on paper, whatever my family did, that may not be what my heart and spirit actually want. What do I want? Where am I at? Recognize that you might be in cognitive dissonance at any given point throughout the course of the relationship. It's okay, breathe through it. Sometimes even calm waters are uncomfortable because we grew up in a family or dynamic where we were used to chaos. So cognitive dissonance may float in and out of your relationship. Just give yourself permission to step back, see where you're at, honor where you are, trust your gut, make decisions from an authentic place, ground and anchor yourself in what works for you, what aligns for you, and just be, if you can be in bliss and joy, no matter what the stage is in the relationship, knowing that you deserve to show up as your best self. And that, to some degree, is going to attract partners who are also doing the same.
So one thing just to note about, some of this tension and challenges, like that's why it's so helpful and powerful to find, other folks who are you are resonating with, and also continuing, like never to rest too heavy in that, because you're going to always be individuating even from that group. But it's like, the more you come into your own beliefs, like surrounding yourself with folks who help you to really root in yourself and point you back to yourself, I find is really supportive. So let's do. Okay, so we're going to look at what is in our control and what's out of our control in the realm of dating specifically. And this to me is such an important thing to think about, because I find with modern day dating and the way people think about it, a lot of the control is placed outside of ourselves. So what can we control? We can control showing up, our willingness to actually give energy to something, our willingness to form a new connection, the boundaries that we set, the words that we speak, our intentions going into something, which is often something that we might overlook. So like, what are my intentions showing up to this? The attributes that you are actively cultivating within yourself. This is one of the main reasons I started humhum, is I felt like, when I was using dating apps or just dating in general, there's this kind of mentality or heart energy that gets cultivated that's very impatient and transactional and judgmental. And it's like, I don't want to water those seeds in myself. I want to give the energy to the things that I want to focus on, like presence and kindness and patience and other skills like curiosity. So how can we intentionally choose to water the things that we want to cultivate within our hearts versus all of our kind of weaknesses or shortcomings? And reactivity versus responsiveness. And then lastly, attitude, narratives, and framing. And we'll talk a little bit about narratives, but things that are not in our control, which I think get way too much play in the dating realm, which is why I feel like it kind of feels just gross and a little bit manipulative and contrived, is because there's such an emphasis on the outcome rather than the process. And it's not to say that the outcome isn't important. Like, if you're interested in partnership and that's what your heart wants, beautiful, own that. Like that's not what we're saying. Is we're not saying don't think about that. It's more that the actual outcome is not in our control, but what's in our control is how we show up and the willingness and the energy and what we're cultivating. So the same thing with if there's reciprocity or not. It's oftentimes, challenging to feel a certain way and then not have that be reciprocated or not have that felt met. Like that is part of the process. So how do we care for ourselves in the process of recognizing that some of that is just out of our control. Another person's circumstance is out of our control. Another person's perception of us is out of our control. Other people's experiences or efforts, how much they're putting in, that's not in our control, but how we set boundaries and how we respond is in our control. And those are the things that we can practice and cultivate. So yeah, and I think focusing your energy on what is giving you energy and what makes you feel good versus what is exhausting, which is kind of that manipulative, coercive game aspect of dating, like that isn't going to support you. And what I've seen in our community is, people will date with humhum for a little while and then decide like, actually, I'm excited about dating again. I want to go meet more people. So they might use other apps, but they're relating then to those apps in a very different way. And they're naturally starting to connect with more aligned connections. And so it really is about that inner work and that inner process. So next clip is going to be about Eileen and a reflection question. This is a quicker one.
Because we're dynamic and we're always evolving, we're always changing, we're always growing. And part of being human is using our collective and individual wisdom and experiences, merging them and allowing us to constantly launch from the new paradigm based on what's appropriate. So a very simple, basic question that we can ask ourselves often, if not every day, who am I now? Based on my integrated experience, my wisdom, what my parents' relationship taught me, what my previous relationships have taught me, what I know about my own attachment style and communication style. And by the way, with attachment, we don't have to get locked into, well, this is how I was raised, so therefore I am. No, we have the ability to integrate our wisdom, our personal experience, and all that we're learning now, and all the ways that we're learning to practice self-care and calm our nervous system and stay self-regulated. We can integrate all of that and actually move into secure attachment. There may be people who don't agree with that or believe that, but I do feel we're very resilient and that we're always capable of becoming better. So who am I now? And how do I want to move through the world now?
Okay. So who am I now? So this question, I think, is a really powerful one to ask yourself regularly. And I was reading up on just some work with other founders that are creating awesome work in the world. And this one founder, her name's Bree Wolfson, and she was talking about how for her professional life, every 6 months, she'll revisit writing her bio, just like who is she in the professional world? And then also a user guide to collaborating with her. And I loved this because I thought not only could this be applied to professional world, but like to dating as well. And when I say bio, I don't mean like, oh, your dating profile, but also why not? Like, even if it's just for you, revisiting the question of like, what am I bringing forth? Like, how do I want to see myself for you? And being able to actually put some words to that. And then this, I call it the operating system to my heart, but it's something that I find is a really, really helpful practice, even if I'm not sharing it with another person, just for myself to reflect on like, what are my needs right now? What are my, passions, my desires? How do I tend to myself when I get off balance? How do I tend to myself in these different situations? And, reflecting on these things like, okay, if I'm feeling grumpy, like, what do I need or want another person to know about that? Or if I'm not in a great space and I'm feeling defeated or low energy, like, how can I tend to myself? But also, what instructions would I give to someone else to, hold my heart with the kind of care that I would hold my own heart with? And so sometimes putting words to that and really reflecting on it, I find super helpful. So you can take this as an exercise to explore with, and not as like this is a warning. When I'm like this, then like, watch out, this is what happens, but more just, how can I best care for this being? And how can I teach someone else to best care for this being? And so really thinking about that. Okay. So this notion of momentum, when you're in a new connection, oftentimes it can feel really exciting. And it's another place where we also want to stay individuated, because sometimes with that momentum, it's easy to want to continue to feed that energy of like agreement and alignment. And so being aware if you notice yourself any kind of little micro misalignments, those can start to accrue and we can start to lose ourselves or become, a little more enmeshed. And I think it's just using the energy of a new connection to really fuel the willingness to pause and say, like, am I being true to myself? And, in any choice point, in any moment where a decision needs to be made, let's say you're deciding on, okay, are we still, do we want to see other people? Are we only seeing each other? Like, what does that look like? Thinking about what kind of container or structure or agreements will best support this new connection. These are all opportunities that that you can really align with yourself and be like, what is true for me before I agree with, with what this other person's offering, or before I, sometimes we might even agree without them saying it. Like, we'll think about what they're, especially if we're like a pleaser type, we'll think about what they're gonna say and then want to mirror that. And so, like, how to not self-abandon in this process and really stay very close to your own truth. That takes a lot of skill, maturity, courage, and patience, because there will be times where, we can get lost in that. So let's see. Okay. And one other thing I'll say too is, like, I'm really into journaling and also leaving voice memos. So if I'm ever feeling torn or conflicted internally, hearing myself talk out loud as if, I were my own friend, I find really helpful. I know that sounds a little weird maybe, but I find it super helpful because we almost can hear ourselves and relate to ourselves in a very friendly and kind way. So, okay, this next bit, I'm going to talk, Eileen is going to talk a little bit about power struggles in new or early relationships or connections. And then we'll wrap up from there to go into our discussion group.
No matter how great a relationship is, no matter how exciting and fun and fulfilling it seems to be, at some point we're going to, hit some kind of wall with the person. It's inevitable that we're going to disagree on something, or that we're going to feel a little bit of tension. That's normal. If we can remain individuated and differentiate from the way maybe our families dealt with tension in the past, if we can allow ourselves to remain present and just show up and be our true selves, it allows us to work through power struggles a lot easier. A power struggle refers to an evident or subtle competition in a relationship for control and influence. This is how it shows up. Here's some areas, common areas. If you already have, let's say you already have a kid and you're dating someone who already has a kid, you might find there's conflict in the way that your parenting styles. And so that might affect your dating relationship. Or you don't have children, whether or not to have children. Do you want to even have children? And, then there's political things. What are your views on abortion or on politics? These conversations can begin to set us up for subtle competition and needing to be right and to argue our case. Also, how to spend money or how you make your money, religious beliefs and practices, your moral or ethical code on certain matters, lifestyle choice. All of these kinds of things can be a source of power struggle. Now, some signs that a relationship may have some power struggles in it, or a partner that struggles with power struggle, is when you notice that you're having trouble seeing things from the other person's perspective. If you are engaging in controlling behaviors, or the other person is doing that, or if you resort to manipulation tactics, if you find yourself holding grudges because they didn't agree with you, or they disagreed with you, or you felt embarrassed that they had a different perspective than yours in front of your parents. If you find that your boundaries are being crossed, or that you're crossing boundaries, then that's letting you know power struggle is here, alive and well in our relationship. And if you feel like you don't have a voice, if anybody's playing the victim, or if you're becoming vindictive, all of these things are signs that the relationship may have been sabotaged or hijacked by by power struggle. So the question is, how are we going to move through that? When we notice that the power struggle is there, what are we going to do? Are we going to anchor in and we need to be right, or we need to be correct, or are we going to be proactive and actually address the fact, hey, this is coming up for me, and I noticed when you said this, I responded with this, that was my authenticity, but I kind of felt like maybe you got offended, or I hurt your feelings, or you got upset with me. Did I read that right? Can we talk about it? You see, we can alleviate so much if we just communicate assertively. Now, of course, all parties involved need to be mature, but it's not so much how do we avoid having power dynamics or power struggles, because I think it's going to happen at some point. The question is, how do we alleviate whatever's going on in our nervous system and in our psyche and in our heart space when it shows up? Can we assertively say, this is how I'm feeling? Are you feeling that way too? Are you noticing that tension that we're having right now? What do we want to do with it? But the point is, talk about it, feel into it, express how you feel, and then let's work through it.
Awesome. So we're going to soon move into our discussion group. But I wanted to just thank all of you for taking the time and for coming. And this will be, it's being recorded, the presentation. And so I'll email that to anyone who chooses. I mean, you're all getting the email anyway, but for those of you that want to stay for the discussion group, please stick on. And for those that are not prepared to do breakout rooms and connect with other folks, then I invite you to drop off. Now's a good time. So I'll give people a moment to decide whatever you want to do. And it's so great to have you all here. And thank you for your comments in the chat. And yeah, I'll stop my screen share. And I'm going to pause recording.